In your solitude on Tattooine, training I have for you.
The Kenobi series explained a lot of things that we fans have been wondering since the original trilogy. Why did Kenobi feel justified in saying that Anakin was dead? Why did he use the name Ben? But there was another question that many people have been wondering since the 2005 release of Revenge of the Sith, and that is, how did Obi Wan age so much in just 19 years?
Hello there. Hello there.
Considering that Revenge of the Sith came out 17 years before Kenobi,
Hello there.
Ewan McGreggor is only 2 years behind, and he looks nothing like the late Great Sir Alec Guinness did in A New Hope. It just seems like a lot of aging for such a short period of time. Now, for years, the generally accepted half-joking answer has been that the harshness of Tattooine is what aged him so rapidly. But now we've seen Kenobi, and know that it takes place 10 years after Revenge of the Sith, and only 9 years before A New Hope, and theoretically Kenobi should be 10/19ths of the way between General Kenobi and Old Ben, but he still looks way too young. He already spent 10 years under the Tatooine sun, and it only did this much? I don't see how another 9 would be enough to age him up to Old Ben status. So if we are to assume that there is an in-universe explanation, rather than just saying the makeup department didn't want to dye Ewan's hair gray, then something had to change to make the last 9 years of Obi-Wan's exile different from the first 10. First, let's get this out of the way. Aging in Star Wars is weird. First off, each planet has their own solar rotation, which seems to not really affect aging very much. After all, Luke and Leia are twins and still considered to be 19, each of them, at the start of A New Hope, despite the fact that they were raised on different planets with different solar rotations. Of course, this is because the galaxy goes by galactic standard years, which was based on the solar cycle of Coruscant and consisted of 365 24-hour Coruscantian days. However, the different local times may account for the fact that Mark Hamill was 26 when he played a 19-year-old Luke Skywalker, and Carrie Fisher was only 19 when playing a 19-year-old Princess Leia, but I'm getting off topic. Another weird thing about aging in Star Wars is actually Yoda. We know that Yoda was over 900 years old when he died.
When 900 years old you reach, look as good you will not.
So it would be pretty reasonable to say that Yoda's species operates on a 10-to-1 scale for humans. If a human can live to be 90, then Yoda can live to be 900. However, this causes problems with the introduction of Grogu.
Wait, they said 50 years old.
Species age differently.
You see, Grogu is infantile, despite being 50 years old. And if Yoda's species only lives to be 900, then this is way too much of their life to spend completely helpless. He acts like he's around 1 year old, not 5. At this rate, he would have to be a teenager by the time he was 650. That is way too old, and way not enough time to spend in adulthood. A small percentage of their life to actually be adult if they're only expected to live to around 900. Now, obviously, there would be extenuating factors. Maybe Yoda's species ages faster once adolescence begins. Maybe Grogu is in a state of arrested development, or spent much of the Imperial era in stasis, losing that 25 years of his life. The last one seems especially likely, but even then, that would put him at an estimated lifespan of 1,800 years old, not 900. That is to say that if he were to be behaving as a 1-year-old at this age, that percentage of his life should give him a lifespan of 1,800 years, so that he would spend the correct percentage of his life as an adult, not just, 150 years of it. Now, of course, this is all just if we're going to assume that the aging of Grogu and Yoda's species is a constant throughout their entire life. But you see, Yoda is way too young to be dying of old age here, if that is true. In fact, come to think of it, Old Ben isn't the only one to age exponentially in the 19 years between prequels and originals. Yoda is also much older, and the CG model used for Yoda in the prequels was made to look much younger than the Yoda puppet used in Empire Strikes Back. And here, there's a greenhouse effect on Dagobah, not the harsh desert suns of Tatooine. Now, this actually has to be much, much more intentional since, they're not working with the constraints of actors. It's not just, oh, well, we picked an actor who happened to be a lot younger than Kenobi should have been. Yoda was CG generated, computer generated, meaning that his appearance is deliberate, and he certainly looks a lot younger than the Yoda puppet did. And this whole thing, if to be looked at in universe, it's almost as if the same thing happened to Yoda that happened to Ben in the last 9 years of his exile. Now, I'm sure astute viewers can see where I'm going with this, because you see, there is something that occurred to both of them during that time. Something that makes the last 9 years of Kenobi's exile different from the first 10, and something that makes the last 19 years of Yoda's life different from the first 800 and something. Of course, we saw that in Kenobi. After 10 years of gracefully aging in exile, Obi Wan meets the Force ghost of Qui-Gon Jinn and begins his training to preserve his spirit after death. Force ghost training. We know that Yoda too began his Force ghost training during the final days of the Clone Wars, and would continue to do so until he died in Return of the Jedi. You know who else aged a lot between films? Luke Skywalker. Now, normally I tried to avoid permitting evidence found in the sequel trilogy because
I'd rather not talk about it.
But in this case, I am going to make a quick exception. So Luke's appearance in The Force Awakens takes place in the year 34 ABY, or 30 years after A New Hope. Yet the movie released in 2015. 38 real-world years after the release of A New Hope. Meaning that Mark Hamill has aged 38 years, while Luke has only aged 34. Yet, despite the fact that Mark Hamill was 64 years old in 2015 when playing the 53-year-old Luke, hair and makeup decided to age him more than Mark Hamill had aged in order to reprise his role. Let me say that again. Luke is supposed to be 53 here. Luke is supposed to die at the age of 53. Mark Hamill was 64 at the time. Mark Hamill looks younger than Luke. Hair and makeup purposefully aged him more to play a character who is younger than he is in real life. And if we are admitting the dumpster fire that is The Rise of Skywalker into evidence, I guess Luke can also Force ghost. Which, let's face it, I would say is probably the only real piece of evidence that I would actually accept from the sequel trilogy, because, yeah, of course Luke can Force ghost. I am very okay with this. Placing all the evidences together, it seems quite clear that Jedi who are able to preserve their consciousness after death seem to age much more rapidly than their counterparts who never learned this ability. For contrast, Mace Windu is also 53 when he died in Revenge of the Sith, and yet hair and makeup decided to make Samuel L. Jackson look younger than he did at the time of playing that role. Also, Mace didn't seem to age at all in the 13 years between Phantom Menace and Revenge of the Sith. He pretty much looks exactly the same in these two movies. Basically meaning that from the age of 40 to 53, he didn't age. Yet between the ages of 38 and 57, Obi-Wan aged this much. Yeah, Obi-Wan was only 4 years older at the time of his death than Mace Windu was at the time of his. I don't think 4 years is a reasonable amount of time for the difference between this and this.
Where did you dig up that old fossil?
And so it seems consistent that all characters who are able to preserve their consciousness after death aged considerably more rapidly than those who could not. So what if that is actually part of the process, depositing your living force into the cosmic force while you are alive, almost like a bank or a life insurance policy. You lose more now, but you're able to withdraw your deposit after you die. Well, it isn't conclusive. I think it is probably the best explanation we have. And if the theory is true, and learning to preserve yourself after death creates this aging process, then it explains how Obi-Wan aged so dramatically in the last 9 years of his exile, while he aged hardly at all in the first 10. It would also mean that members of Yoda's species would be expected to live far longer than just 900 years, explaining Grogu's prolonged adolescence. However, it also carries with it one very concerning repercussion. After all, there is a canon precedent for this, for Force abilities and techniques that age and deform the body, and, well, maybe not so much specific techniques and abilities as an entire side of the Force. Yes, I am talking about dark side corruption, the idea that using the dark side of the Force ages and decays your body. Does this mean that preserving your consciousness after death is a dark side ability? After all, maintaining individuality instead of dissipating into the allness of the cosmic force could be framed as a selfish act. And by George Lucas' interpretation of the difference between the light and dark sides of the force, it's just selfishness versus selflessness. Is the rapid aging a sign of selfishness and dark side corruption? After all, we know the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise. Preserving life is a technique mastered by the Sith. And that's only part of the story. As we see through Yoda's Force Ghost training in the Clone Wars, a key part of that training is the idea known in Jungian psychology as the integration of the shadow. When Yoda encounters his dark side self, he roller coasters through the 5 stages of grief, returning to denial between each step. Denial.
Yoda recognizes you not.
Anger.
Part of me, you are not.
Bargaining.
See not what is inside Yoda. I choose not to give you power.
And here we can see depression and finally acceptance.
Recognize you. I do.
In order to succeed, Yoda has to stop denying the existence of his dark side and stop fighting against it. However, he's not supposed to embrace it or succumb to it. The scene is reflective of an idea among Jungian psychologists known as the integration of the shadow, and to oversimplify, that idea is that there is darkness within everyone, referred to Jungians as the shadow, and denying it is just suppressing it in a pressure cooker where it will eventually overflow and take control of you in these uncontrollable outbursts. Jungian psychologists will often teach their patients to integrate their shadow and make it subservient to their conscious mind, the decision-making parts of them. This is an oversimplification, but basically the idea is that ambition is not evil, but selfish ambition is. So take the ambitious part of you and take control of it so that you can use and make use of the efficacy of ambition without succumbing to the moral failings of selfishness. So what Yoda does in this scene is actually very similar to that. Yoda had been pretending that there was no darkness within him at all, and so he was blind to it and potentially vulnerable to it taking control of him or subverting him unknowingly. In fact, he admits that this happened to him during the Clone Wars era in Rebels when he says that he didn't realize that his engagement in the Clone Wars itself was letting his dark side take control of him.
In our arrogance, join the conflict. Swiftly we did. Fear, anger, hate, consumed by the dark side, the Jedi were. A long time fought I did, consumed by fear I was.
Only by admitting that he was capable of dark temptations was he actually able to reject the desires of evil. It seems that this is a crucial part of Force Ghost training, and as we can see through the fact that Anakin was able to become a Force Ghost. Anakin was able to even without training because he did so unwittingly. He unwittingly integrated his shadow when he stopped allowing the shadow of Vader to control him, and he killed the Emperor. And he demonstrated a use of his shadow, in other words, killing, for the sake of goodness, the protection of his son. So really my question is this: is the integration of the shadow enough to draw out dark side corruption? After all, the point is still to have the light side in control while the dark side is not vanquished, but made subservient to the light and given no power over the individual. There is a major problem with this, however, and it's that it has been traditionally understood and accepted in canon that the Sith can't manifest as Force Ghosts, and that the ability is one that can only be learned through the embracing of the light side of the Force. This would seem to invalidate the idea that the aging Yoda, Kenobi, and Luke was the result of dark side corruption, but lend more credence to the first idea I posed, that they are somewhat depositing their life force into the cosmic force so that they can withdraw their deposit and collect after they pass on. But what do you guys think? Is the aging process caused by the dark side of the Force and dark side corruption, or is it just their life force being deposited into the cosmic force? Either way, I think it's pretty clear at this point that their aging so quickly is the result of Force Ghost training, but Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, because as always, I want to know what you, my friends, have to say about our favorite galaxy far, far away. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, or if you learned absolutely nothing new, you can feel free to leave a thumbs down, completely guilt-free, because that tells me I'm not doing my job. Thanks again for watching, and as always, may the lore be with you, now and forever.